Everyone, please take your seats. We'll get started in just a moment. Maybe some more coffee too. Everyone, please take your seats. We'll get started in just a moment. Maybe some more coffee too. Everyone, please take your seats. We'll get started in just a moment. Maybe some more coffee too. I'm asking you to get coffee, I guess. Please take your program here at the Inter-American Dialogue, which is one of 5 programs that we run. It is a tremendous pleasure and honor to welcome you to the dialogue today for this discussion of prospects for Latin America, Japan, U.S. cooperation, specifically on energy transition and critical minerals supply, although we know there are lots of other areas in which the U.S., Japan, and the region can also cooperate. This is a hybrid event, so allow me to extend a very warm welcome to our online participants too, including those who are joining us late at night in Japan. Thank you so much to those in the room and also those online for being here. I also want to note that simultaneous interpretation into Spanish is available for those who are online on Zoom. So please feel free to take advantage of that feature by clicking the interpretation link at the bottom of your screen. This is a very special event for a lot of different reasons, including the content, but also because it marks the 10th in a series of collaborations between the Dialogue's Asia and Latin America program and the Japan Association of Latin America and the Caribbean, JLAC. It has been an absolutely tremendous honor to work over the years with JLAC, which is an organization committed, as the Dialogue is here in the United States, to elevating Latin America's place in national policy making. Our joint work over the past decade has included events here in Washington, in Tokyo, and also across parts of the region. And we hope to do much more in the coming years. Many of our work or our events, over the past decade have considered key developments in Japan's policy toward Latin America, including a very clear and growing focus on boosting activity in Latin America since the administration of late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. This began with what was called the Juntos policy, and has grown over time to incorporate ever more forms of engagement with the region. We've also jointly considered prospects for greater US, Japan, Latin America cooperation on issues of mutual interest, whether working together or in coordination in parallel. Today, we will again consider the possibility of enhanced Latin America, Japan, US partnership, though with a focus on energy transition and critical minerals supply. We see this as a particularly opportune moment for this discussion, given that US-Japan partnership and dialogue is at a relative high, upheld by wide-ranging mutual interests and also by an expansive and growing architecture for bilateral exchange and cooperation. This is also a moment when the US and Japan are increasingly working together in important ways in other regions, including the Asia-Pacific region most prominently, but also Africa, on infrastructure development, for instance, or to advance wide-ranging development objectives. This is also a moment, as we all know, in which the goal of energy transition is fundamental, is critical, as is access to the minerals and metals that are required to achieve certain green objectives. We see this event as really the beginning of a conversation that we very much hope will continue, even amid political transition here in the United States, in Japan also, as it turns out, right, and in parts of the Latin American region. We'll begin the event with a brief discussion with Director General Yasushi Noguchi, who is Assistant Minister and also Director General of the Latin American and Caribbean Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. And this discussion will be moderated by our very own Rebecca Bild Chavez, who is President and CEO of the Inter-American Dialogue. But before we get started, allow me to express our deep gratitude to our sponsors, Mitsubishi Corporation, the law firm Nagashima Ono and Tsunematsu, and finally the law firm Nishimura and Asahi. And so thank you all very much for your support of this important event and discussion. And with that, I'll turn the floor to Rebecca to begin the next portion of the event. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you for setting the stage for this conversation. And Director General Noguchi, we are so honored to have you with us today. We actually had the opportunity to begin the conversation last night, so I'm very excited to continue it now. And again, as Margaret said, thank you so much to our audience that's here in person, but also to all of you that are joining us virtually. So Margaret noted in her remarks that Japan has focused more intensively on Latin America over the past few years, and you mentioned the Juntos policy as an example. To what do you attribute this growing focus?
Good morning, and thank you very much, Margaret and Rebecca, for inviting me to this very important event. Actually, this year, 2024, is a very important year for Japan and Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, as you know, Peru is the presidency of APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and Brazil is G20 presidency. And the international community pays a lot of attention to Latin America and the Caribbean. So we are expecting the leadership of Latin America and the Caribbean. And that is why this year, in February, our former foreign minister, Yoko Kamikawa, visited Panama, announcing diplomatic initiatives toward Latin America and the Caribbean. And her point was that based on the past experiences of working closely with Latin America and the Caribbean, she wanted to enhance the relations further. And through policy dialogues, she wanted to identify with each country priority areas of cooperation and taking advantage of the international organizations or sub-regional groups. And so we are implementing these diplomatic initiatives, deepening our policy dialogue with each individual country of Latin America and the Caribbean. And also in May, our then Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited Brazil in May, and he delivered a comprehensive speech on policy, Japanese policy toward Latin America and the Caribbean. And his message was that based on the recognition that unfortunately now the international community is divided very seriously, and he wanted to take the international community from the divided situation to a more harmonized situation. And he showed kind of directions in which Japan, the Latin American Caribbean countries will be able to cooperate together. And let me summarize his message in the following 4 points. First one is that, as I mentioned, now the international community is seriously challenged, particularly the free and open international order based on the rule of law. And we know what's happening in Ukraine, Russian aggression in Ukraine, and also we are concerned about the Chinese behavior in East China Sea and South China Sea. And we think that the international community is faced with this challenge of changing the status quo by force unilaterally. So we need to enhance and maintain this international order. And from this perspective, Latin America and the Caribbean countries, we share with those countries common values, principles, such as democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of navigation, rule of law, respecting the sovereignty, respecting the territorial integrity. So, and as a matter of fact, after the Russian aggression in Ukraine, there was a UN General Assembly resolution condemning the Russian aggression, and among 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, 28 countries supported this resolution, which show the common values between Japan, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And this percentage of among 33 countries of 28 countries supporting is higher than in Asia, higher than in the Middle East, higher than in Africa. So we are confident that the Latin American and the Caribbean countries are very important partner to keep and enhance the international order. So that is why Prime Minister Kishida visited Brazil and G20 presidency, and they discussed a lot on rule of law, the importance of maintaining this international order. And the second point is that Latin America and the Caribbean is very abundant of food, feed, and natural resources, including critical minerals such as copper and lithium. And also, I would like to draw your attention that compared with Europe or compared with Middle East, Latin America and the Caribbean region does not have armed conflicts, relatively stable, and they are very stable provider of these food, critical minerals. So in this sense, the importance of Latin America and the Caribbean region is growing. And the Japanese government is supporting Japanese companies investing in mining field with government finance or something like that. So this is the second point. And the third point is that Latin America and the Caribbean countries are becoming more and more important players, partners to solve or to address the global challenges such as climate change or environment issues. And this month, later this month, Colombia will host COP16 or biodiversity conferences. And Brazil will be presiding COP30 next year. And actually, they are very vocal and they are showing leadership in this important issue. And also, Latin America and the Caribbean region is suffering a lot from this supposed impact caused by climate change. And yeah, we witnessed, for example, I visited last year to Manaus in Brazil. I noticed the historic record low level of water, and because of the shortage of water, and also Panama Canal suffered a lot from the shortage of water, and this impeded the passage of ships of Panama Canal. And I know that Ecuador is forced to cut electricity provision because of the shortage of water, because they are dependent on the hydropower energy. So Japan is helping those countries energy transition. For example, we are building geothermal power plants in Costa Rica. And also we are starting this kind of geothermal power plants cooperation in Ecuador as well. And so we are very happy to support these Latin American and Caribbean countries' energy transition as well. And the fourth point is that Japanese uniqueness, unique linkage with the Latin American and the Caribbean, which means existence or presence of Japanese descendants community. We call it Nikkei community. And in Brazil, we have almost 2.7 million Japanese descendants, more than 1% of the Brazilian population. And in Peru or in Argentina or Paraguay and Mexico, in Bolivia as well. And they are hard workers. They are very respected in each country. And now they are more and more active in terms of organizing Japanese festivals. Through these Japanese festivals, we are able to disseminate Japanese cultures or Japanese gastronomies. And we believe that together with the Japanese descendants community, with Nikkei community, we are able to spread out our cultures, our values, our gastronomy. So, and also Japanese descendants community is able to help Japanese companies' investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this fourth point is also very important. Thank you.
I really appreciate those 4 points. I think it really points to such an affirmative agenda that recognizes, I think so often in the United States, when we talk about Latin America, it's the focus on the challenges and this affirmative gender agenda, kind of recognizing all of the opportunities in the region and the positives. We're going to take some of your talking points because I think that it's a really compelling reason why Latin America deserves much more attention. So I have a question that's kind of tying to what Margaret said at the beginning, and it's this point that the Japanese-US relationship is at a real high right now. And given that, do you see room for enhanced cooperation, building on Margaret's point about almost like this trilateral, the US, Japan, Latin America, and the Caribbean, whether it be in tandem or parallel? Do you see any opportunities, anything that you could point to along those lines?
Yes, we have very good relations between Japan and United States. In April this year, Prime Minister Kishida visited Washington, D.C., and he was able to deepen US-Japan ties with President Biden. And also the new Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, he assumed his position on October 1st. And soon after his assuming the position, he had a phone call with President Biden. And both of them agreed that they are ready to enhance further deterrence and Japan-US alliance. And Japan-US relations is not only bilateral relations, but we are global partners. So we are determined to cooperate for the global issues as well. And for example, in the Western Hemisphere, one of the biggest concerns is the situation in Haiti. And we respect US leadership to solve this unstable situation in Haiti. And the US led or US push forward the deployment of MSS mission, multinational security support mission. And Japan is focusing on humanitarian assistance to vulnerable people in Haiti. And also we are providing vehicles or training to Haitian National Police. So in this way, Japan and US are cooperating for the stabilization of Haiti. And also, Japan is making a lot of efforts to provide assistance to the migrants. I know that immigration issue is a very important and sensitive issue for the United States. And there are many, many migrants from Cuba or from Haiti, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, or from Central America to the United States. And they are stationed in Central America or Mexico. And we know that they are under the very vulnerable situation, particularly women and children. So we are extending assistance to those vulnerable people through international organizations such as UNHCR, IOM, UNICEF, or UN Women. So this is also a kind of cooperation between Japan and US and also Latin America and the Caribbean. And another aspect is that recent years, I know that there are several cases of Japanese companies investing in Central America and the Caribbean through the United States. For Japanese companies, Central America and the Caribbean region is at a long distance, and they don't have enough information. Looking from Japan, but once stationed in the United States, and from United States, it's easier to get information more familiar with Central America and the Caribbean. So we are observing a trend of Japanese companies investing in Central America and the Caribbean through the United States. So this is also a kind of Japan-US Latin American cooperation. Thank you.
Those examples are excellent because they all reflect priorities. And I'm thinking about, in particular, about your Central America example and the US root causes strategy, that the only way to address migration in the long run is to provide opportunities to those living in that region. So that really, really appreciate those comments. This is a question more specifically about investments. You mentioned Central America. So US and Japanese investment in Latin America reached a relative high in 2023, according to UN ECLAC. To what do you attribute this growth?
Yes, for example, in Mexico, we have more than 1,500 Japanese companies operating in Mexico, particularly in the manufacturing. And their business model is to produce products in Mexico, bearing in mind the Mexican domestic market and also US big market as well. So we notice a kind of nearshoring trend of Japanese companies in Mexico. That is why we are very much interested in what will happen with the revision of the USMCA. So we hope that this revision will not impact negatively the Japanese companies in Mexico. And also in Brazil, more and more Japanese companies are interested in bioeconomy, or, for example, producing SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, from ethanol or sugar canes. And also Japanese car companies are expanding production of flex cars in Brazil. And for Japanese companies, they are focusing not only on electric vehicles, but also gasoline, ethanol, flex, hybrid, and hydrogen cars as well. And they give importance to Brazil because they are able to produce a lot of internal combustible engine vehicles, and which is very important for Japanese car companies. And Brazil is becoming a kind of a platform of Japanese internal combustible engine vehicles, production of these vehicles in Brazil. So this is also another important area for Japanese companies.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Great. So I kind of to transition into the next panel, which we're really looking forward to. And particularly if we turn to renewable energy development and critical mineral supply, how important is US-Japanese cooperation in that area, or also just Japanese involvement more generally in that area in Latin America, or also globally?
Okay, as I mentioned, Japanese government is assisting Costa Rica and Ecuador to build geothermal power plants, renewable energy. And another potential area is production of sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, producing ethanol from sugarcane in Brazil, exporting this ethanol to US, and producing SAF in US. And then they are able to provide SAF to the Japanese air companies' aircraft. And this is also Japan, US, Latin America renewable energy cooperation. And also in Paraguay, we are helping them to shape national strategy for green hydrogen. So we are very proud of that, and we are ready to continue to support for the energy transition in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you.
I thought this was such an interesting and broad, we got a real sense of the breadth of Japanese involvement, not regionally, I mean, across, you mentioned Paraguay, you mentioned Central America, you mentioned Mexico, but also just the different sectors and the richness of Japanese involvement in the region. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Thank you very much, for this opportunity.
Thank you. We'll move right into the panel. So I invite our panelists to come up and have a seat in no particular order. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Director General, for those very insightful comments, for laying the ground for this follow-on discussion. It strikes me that indeed, as we've mentioned, and I think Japan and the US have articulated many times over, there are many shared interests, many common objectives and initiatives. And so this panel will explore the opportunities for enhanced cooperation between the US, Japan, and Latin American countries toward progress on energy transition, but also in terms of critical mineral supply. But of course, I welcome comments on other areas of cooperation and collaboration as well. Let me start off with a question or actually, let me introduce our panelists. You have their bios or rather their affiliations in your agenda, but for those who are online, allow me to welcome Jane Nakano, who is a senior fellow at the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Oliver Stunkel, who is associate professor at the Getulio Vargas Foundation. Welcome. Manabu Ohara, who is Director General of the Latin America and Caribbean Department of the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Let me skip back to Kaila Kitamura, who is an analyst with the Congressional Research Service. Nobuaki Yamaguchi, second to last there in the line, a professor at the Research Institute for Economics and Business Administration at Kobe University, also vice chair of the Japan Association of Latin America and the Caribbean, our partner on this initiative. And then last but not least, certainly Martín Obaya, who is vice director of CENIT at the Universidad de San Martín and a researcher at CONICET. So thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. These are some of the foremost experts on prospects for enhanced collaboration, especially in these sectors, but coming at this from very different perspectives. So I think this will make for a very rich discussion. Jane, if you don't mind, I'd love to sort of start out with a question to you. I know that I've operated under the premise when considering the prospect for enhanced US, Japan, Latin America partnership that there is much that's being done in other regions, right? And that much of this experience could potentially be drawn upon, or we could learn lessons from it and bring those examples to the Latin American context in a more substantial way. And you have looked at, Japan-U.S. cooperation internationally in areas of energy transition in particular, clean energy supply chain development too. What are some of the signs of notable U.S. and Japanese cooperation and coordination in regions other than Latin America? Can you give us a kind of sense of how things have developed elsewhere and whether the premise on which I am operating is indeed accurate, right? And are there ways that U.S., Japan, and partner nations can better overcome, what really have been some structural and often administrative challenges to making real and lasting progress in these areas?
Thank you so much for having me, Margaret. It's my pleasure to be here. So in the bilateral U.S.-Japan sense, clean energy has been a rising area. But I'd say that it's only rather in recent years that there's been much more sort of structured look at how the bilateral collaboration could be happening in, outside, Japan or the U.S. And I think in many ways, there's this more of a multilateral architecture that the two countries have been, trying to be the leaders in. So I think, outside Latin America, some of the examples that come to my mind are in Africa, where, under the Partnership for the Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGI, there's a huge focus on infrastructure needs that also relate to energy. And obviously, energy infrastructure, in my view, and often, I guess, among energy nerds, it's really the backbone of modern economy. You need energy infrastructure, but then also energy fuels and these minerals, they are the lifeblood. So by tackling infrastructure as well as just sort of looking at the upstream extractive side, I think, the United States and Japan are really trying to push the clean energy agenda. So the Lobito Corridor project that is to really start this railroad to bring, I guess, connect, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zambia to be able to help the African nations' aspiration for the sustained economic development come true through not just the connectivity, but also getting much more value out of the minerals. Critical minerals has been one of the flagships in my view. Also, there are non-mineral related cooperation in Africa, including in places Ghana, Sierra Leone, South Africa, looking at some of more of a climate resiliency side. That's also very important because the mitigation and adaptation have to be happening at the same time. We're really in the 11th hour when it comes to trying to really reverse some of the trends that we're seeing. But then in Southeast Asia, particularly, I think Japan has been taking a lot of leadership with the partnership with the U.S., not just the government agencies, but also private sector entities, stakeholders, trying to look at power projects, like things like hydropower in Fiji, etc. I don't know if I have a couple more minutes. Yeah. Also, I think when it comes to some of the much more perhaps focused ones, the Just Energy Transition Partnership in Indonesia has been a really interesting case. That's where there was a goal set to try to have Indonesia's power sector meet the peak emissions by 2030, facilitating the coal-fired power plant closure, as well, and while sort of trying to raise roughly, I think, $20 billion. It's a very ambitious, it's a very important agenda, very ambitious, but I think there have been a lot of challenges, and that sort of gives me a good segue to what I wanted to, the latter half of your important question. In general, but let me just sort of make sure that I'm clear. I think, some of the challenges, the types of challenges often vary from a region to region, also from a country to country, project to project, and energy resources or certain technologies that we're looking at. But so it's really, I think I'm a bit hesitant to sort of generalize, but when it comes to, for example, Indonesia, I think the the level of ambition, requires or really probably from Iridium needed much faster sort of a funding commitment or support financial commitment from the global community. And also for many of the emerging economies, energy demand growth is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously, it's a good thing in general. It's just, the challenge is how to meet that growth without, increasing emissions level. But I think the strong focus, if the primary focus, and I'm not necessarily saying that's what the JETP is, but if the primary focus becomes too much about emissions and then everything else sort of becomes secondary, it is a challenging way to start the work because there's a lot of sort of social issues attached to energy industries, both upstream, but then also some of the power plant operation, et cetera. So it's tricky. So I think that's, some of the administrative or structural. I think when it also comes to, quite frankly, Latin America, I think, better appreciating the host country's approach to mineral wealth is probably something that, was probably underappreciated at the dawn of this, critical minerals sort of era, if you will. The energy transition is extremely minerals intensive. But many of these countries, look at these natural resources to be, something that belongs to the nations. And I think both the United States and Japan need to approach this issue, the sense of equity, not just for vis-a-vis host governments, but local communities vis-a-vis their own governments, so as not to repeat some of the oil gas related sort of resource colonialism. The critiques that we saw back in the 80s and 90s, et cetera. So this is a chance for the two governments to get it right this time.
Thank you, Jane. Those are critical comments, and it's, as you mentioned, I mean, there are a lot of potential obstacles or just impediments that can be overcome, right, to more in the way of collaboration. But it's in thinking about not only what's needed in the way of investment and how to operationalize this cooperation, but then also the approach and the process and how to do it effectively and equitably and sustainably. And so thank you for that. Let's turn to Oliver. Oliver, we heard a little bit of reference in the fireside chat to Japan's engagement with Brazil and in sort of the economy. And certainly Brazil is a critical investment destination for both the US and Brazil in wide-ranging sectors. Many interests would seem even to align. How do you believe the US and Japan can best fit into Brazil's plans to advance its own energy transition? While also supporting, of course, as Jane noted, right, the sustainable extraction, whether including at the local level, right, of minerals and metals and even green hydrogen, right, that are all these things needed to make these transitions feasible. Is it on?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. As you know, I'm a great fan of broadening Latin America, Japan ties for a very simple reason. I think despite some progress over the past decade and a half, I think the region continues to require massive investments in developing knowledge about Asia. We're seeing a shift of power towards Asia. There is a lack of expertise in the region about how to manage that change. I think our elites are still profoundly Atlantic-centric. I see that with my exchange students who very few of them still do their exchange years, for example, in Asia. And I think there are no places on earth that are better equipped to train specialists in Asia than US universities and Japanese universities, because let's say we do send some students to China, of course, but they don't have the liberty to actually develop independent research on geopolitical trends in Asia. So in that sense, I think there's tremendous potential and an urgent need for Latin America to adapt to a more Asia-centric world, and I think Japan is the ideal partner for this endeavor. When it comes to the energy transition, I think it's also important to mention that Latin America has, for centuries, surfed the wave of commodity booms. A lot suggests we're at the beginning of one, but of course the profound hope across the region is that we'll do better than in past, when surfing past commodity boom waves, because we haven't been able to sort of move up the value chain, utilize this to develop and diversify our economies in a more sustainable manner. There's a lot of hope that this initial phase now of the green energy transition will bring us back to the spirit of the 2000s, when countries like Brazil were actually capable of addressing some of the most pressing issues that the country's facing, like inequality and poverty. And I think that when the topic is energy transition, it's important to keep in mind that from a Latin American perspective, there's so many other things that are attached to that, which are intimately tied to the way the entire region thinks about this unique opportunity that the next 5 years, I think, present. Now, what does that mean for the US and Japan? Just a couple of thoughts. I think the more this engagement can emphasize the potential for Latin America to go beyond its role as a mere commodity exporter, the better. There is tremendous potential in lithium, but there are very few leading research centers in lithium, for example. So emphasizing this area, I think, is crucial. We already see that the leading researchers in green energy from Latin America, most of them are actually not in Latin America, right? They join leading institutions abroad. Now, this is a part of life, but at the same time, for example, opportunities to say, okay, there's a leading scholar who goes to the US or goes to Japan, but to make it possible that that person may frequently be back in Latin America, have partnerships with Latin American institutions. I think that is something that that should be kept in mind, always emphasizing that the type of trade relationship is also crucial. The terms of trade of Latin America with the United States or Japan actually much better than the ones with China, for example. So emphasizing that, I think, is absolutely crucial. The second issue is there's a lot of concern across Latin America about the social impact of the green energy transition. I think that's something perhaps less palpable in Japan and the United States. A lot of concern about what that means for developing countries, which have, let's say, 10% of the GDP per capita of the US or Japan, and where there's a lot of, when you look at the trajectory, most likely per capita emissions will actually go up quite substantively, and that there's a concern that sort of the green agenda may hamper the attempts by Latin American economies to, escape the middle income trap, and in that sense, I think being supportive of some of these concerns, I think, are very legitimate, assuring that countries across the global south, but particularly Latin America, do not see this transition as something which makes their development ambitions sort of more complicated. There's a lot of concern about that, particularly in the trade negotiations between Mercosur and Europe, for example, where sort of the green European agenda is seen as an obstacle to Latin American development from, let's say, a Brazilian or Argentine perspective. And then finally, I think there is concern in Latin America that China has been a bit ahead of the curve when it comes to structuring and dominating the green energy supply chains, and that we're basically being forced into a relationship of being at one end of the least attractive end of those supply chains, and that will provide the lithium and all that, and then we'll get the electric cars back from over China, and that there is a sense that that may limit our strategic autonomy, and that I think the way to engage Latin America on these things is not to say be careful with China, but to say the more diverse your strategic partnerships, the greater your autonomy to actually craft a viable path in a world increasingly shaped by turbulence and multipolarity. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I mean, I think That's very good advice, first of all, especially for us here in Washington. But you've also flagged some other critical considerations that I think both governments can pay very close attention to. So thank you so much for that, Oliver. Let me move, to Mr. Ohara, if you don't mind. I'd love to hear about JICA's work. I mean, JICA is, operating extensively globally, of course, including in the Latin American and Caribbean regions. And it's among those institutions that is working to advance progress toward energy transition in Latin America and has been for years, for that matter, right? So could you tell us a little bit about your work and where things are heading and, really what prospects you might see for greater engagement or even, collaboration with partner nations or institutions to include USAID potentially?
All right. Thank you, Margaret. Well, my name is Manabu Ohara from JICA in Tokyo. Well, today I will explain a little bit about our project and cooperation on energy transition, especially renewable energy development. As you all are aware that the Latin American region is at the forefront of renewable energy usage, with over 65% of its energy mix generated coming from renewable energy sources. Hydropower accounts 50%, followed by wind, biofuels, and solar and geothermal. JICA has been collaborated in this area and in this Latin American regions, and also how to say there's countries in the LAC region that provide almost 100% of their country's electricity, including Costa Rica and Paraguay. So JICA collaborating these countries in their energy transition through financial and technical cooperation. Today I will explain two cases. First one is in Costa Rica. JICA has been involved in geothermal development in this country. Currently, almost more than 12% of its Costa Rica's electricity is generated from geothermal energy. As you know, that geothermal power is not affected by weather conditions, so it is a great, important role in Costa Rica as base load energy source. JICA has supported in Costa Rica geothermal development mainly through financial cooperation since 1980s. The project Miravalles Uno, Miravalles geothermal plant has been operating more than 30 years since 1994. It's and also it's powered by Toshiba turbines. So Japan has contributed to this project not only by financial cooperation, but also technically contributed to the geothermal development in Costa Rica. And we have another two projects, Borinquen Uno and Las Pairas Dos is under construction, under development. Well, in this project, we have a very important partner, international organizations such as IDB. IDB is a very important partner to develop not only geothermal energy development, but also energy sector as a whole in Latin America. Well, I'd like to mention that we collaborate development of geothermal plant in Costa Rica, but there exists already exist the great important technical expertise, high-level expertise. It's an implementing agency, implementing institution in Costa Rica. ICE, Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad. Well, they had a great important role in this success to develop geothermal energy in Costa Rica. ICE already started to providing technical cooperation to other countries in Latin America, and JICA, in accordance with, in collaboration with ICE, now conducting technical cooperation, third country training program in whole region in Latin America. So we already started triangular cooperation with Costa Rica in Latin American region. Well, in addition to Costa Rica, the geothermal development we are doing and we are realizing in Bolivia, Laguna Colorada in Bolivia, and also a new project we are now ready to sign the agreement with Ecuador government in Chachimbilo in Ecuador. We are now starting to develop this project. So I think many countries in LAC region has a great potential for geothermal development, and we are collaborating with other partners in Latin America and IDB, international organizations like IDB. We'd like to continue to develop in this geothermal power. Another case is hydrogen, green hydrogen development in Paraguay. Paraguay relies on hydropower by Itaipu Dam, providing 100% of the country's electricity already. More than 50% its total energy production is exported to Brazil and Argentina. Therefore, Paraguay has great potential to produce green hydrogen through hydropower. Paraguayan government has already elaborated a roadmap to develop green hydrogen by support of IDB in 2021. It's now working on national green hydrogen strategy. It's also collaboration with IDB. Well, and JICA, in collaboration with IDB, is about to launch new technical cooperation project. Well, this project first will analyze the pilot project identified in the National Green Hydrogen Strategy. Several pilot projects exist. Then support to develop a financial mechanism to realize each pilot project. Well, in order to ensure profitability of a pilot project on green hydrogen in this field, well, it's still necessary to establish concessional financial mechanism, funding mechanism through contribution or introduction of public funds. So in this situation, international cooperation or international organization, funding organization, such as World Bank and IDB and JICA and others, is very important to contribute to establish such a concessional funding mechanism. So through this project, we like to support to Paraguay government technically. Well, In addition to sovereign loan project, ODA loan, we have a modality for public sector investment finance. JICA has been accumulating experiences in the energy sector in Latin America, including financing solar project in Mexico, and investment to fund for renewable energy and climate change in Brazil.
May I have the role as interpreter,
We'd
please?
like to continue to contribute to the energy transition and with coordination with private sector. Well, in this project, we collaborate or co-finance with different important institutions like IFC and DFC and NatBank, North American Development Bank. And so we'd like to continue to collaborate by co-financing in this situation to promote energy transition in Latin America. Well, yes, well, so with the organizations in the U.S. organization in different different organizations, we'd like to continue to through technical cooperation and financial cooperation in public sector and the private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Obaya. That was excuse me, Mr. Ohara. That was terrific, and you know, it's really helpful to hear some concrete examples, not only of JICA's interest and engagement in various parts of the region, but also of different mechanisms through which cooperation is already taking place, and the extent to those to which those can potentially be replicated in the Latin American context. Let me turn to Mr. Hamaguchi. You are well acquainted with the interest of Japan's private sector. And as Oliver mentioned, we're at a moment in which especially Chinese companies, right, are investing in many of those sectors where Japan and the US have been present for a long time and are also looking to be competitive in some form. We issued a report just a few months ago, earlier this year, called New Infrastructure, which demonstrated just how concentrated Chinese investment is in a handful of mostly innovation-related sectors, to include in the new energy and other technological spaces, to the extent that 60% of overall investments in 2023 were focused on these sectors, whether we're talking about value or number of overall deals. And so this brings up this question of competitiveness, of the viability of more in the way of engagement on the part of US and Japanese companies. And so I'd love to hear from you about what you see looking ahead, right? Are the conditions right for Japanese companies to invest in clean energy supply chains in parts of the region, whether in partnership with the US or otherwise? And if so, where are they focusing, and where should they focus, and what can be done to advance this engagement?
Well, thank you, Margaret. First of all, I'd like to thank the Dialogue for preparing such a wonderful panel with distinguished specialists. And this is, so answering to your question, Margaret, yes, I believe it is the right moment for Japanese private companies to reinvent the investment strategy for Latin America. And they are already moving in that direction, in my impression. According to the 2024 edition of the White Paper on Trade, Japan imports 1,406 items, more than half of the trade volume with China. and corresponding to 30% of all imported items. This figure clearly shows a prominent level of Japan's dependence on Chinese products. Compared to the US importing 567 items with a majority Chinese share, and Germany's 221. So this case of Japan is more than 1,400. Obviously, these items include critical materials for clean energy. And Japanese public and private sectors expand international cooperation to diversify their sources of key minerals and explore and develop them jointly, including with other countries. In this context, Prime Minister's office has positioned the countries in the so-called Global South as partners that will grow and build the future together. And it also promised to strengthen support to address risks that private companies alone cannot take on, and enhance industrial cooperation through the expansion of the network of Japanese companies. Strengthening supply chains and securing critical minerals are core interests in this strategy. It is well known that more than half of the world reserves in lithium are located in LAC region. The region holds some 40% of the world copper reserves. The LAC region also has significant potential to supply some other essential minerals such as bauxite, graphite, nickel, tin, manganese, zinc, and some rare earth elements. It is also expected that Latin America's abundant sources of renewable energy can unlock cost-competitive clean hydrogen production. So Japanese companies are intensifying investment in these mining resources in Latin America, and I can share with you some recent figures. Toshiba and Sojitz signed a MOU with a Brazilian mining company, CBMM, aiming to commercialize large capacity lithium-ion batteries that use niobium titanium oxide for the negative electrode. Brazil accounts for 90% of the world niobium production. This technology enables extremely fast rechargeable batteries used in large electric vehicles such as trucks and buses. Mitsui and Corporate invest in American company Atlas Lithium Corporation, one of the Brazil's largest lithium producers. This company has signed a contract that enables it to purchase a total of approximately 40,000 tons of lithium ore over the next 5 years, equivalent to about 1 million EV batteries. Brazil is seen as competitive against even Australia because of its low cost of mine development and operation. It also presents a rather stable investment climate compared to rising nationalism in natural resource policies in some leading lithium exporting countries. Mitsubishi Material Company began copper concentrate production at the Monteverde mine in Chile and expects to fully operational by the end of this year. Quebrada Blanca copper mine in Chile of Sumitomo Metal and Minerals started full-scale operations. Mitsubishi Corporation holds a 24.5% stake in Anglo-American Sur, which owns the world's largest copper producer, Escondida, and several sizable undeveloped mining claims in Chile. Mining machinery is a sector in which Japanese companies are highly competitive in support of LAC's mining industry. Komatsu is ahead in production and sales, competing for market share with Caterpillar. Hitachi Construction Machinery is boldly entering the South American market, and it will establish a mill liners foundry in Peru through its Australian subsidiary, Bradken. Both Komatsu and Hitachi Construction Machinery announced projects for advancing decarbonization with electric mining machinery powered by rechargeable batteries and fuel cell batteries. Public institutions support risk-taking investment by Japanese companies in Latin America. JBIC signed a loan agreement of $950 million as a part of the syndicate loan of $2.5 billion for the new mine development and plant construction project of Minera Centinela of British capital Antofagasta and Japanese Marubeni. The annual production of copper ingot will increase to 450,000 tons, expected to rise 50% from the current level. Japanese companies will be able to secure almost half of the increased copper production there. JBIC also offers a $248 million loans to Compañía Minera Arqueros in Chile, jointly owned by Nittets Mining and the Chilean Private Investment Fund. Nittets Mining holds the right to offtake all copper concentrates produced at the Arqueros copper mine. In conclusion, the critical mineral resources of Latin America are needed for the global energy transition, which is our common interest of Japan, US, and LAC region. Developing the Latin American countries' mining and processing sector can also help diversify strategic supply chains for the US and Japan. Developing these vast mineral resources will boost LAC's economy. And Japanese private companies are interested in increasing their stakes in Latin American countries in these businesses, and the government institutions help to control risks. I assume that the progress in cooperation may not be so rapid as the Chinese speed, but we need to firmly, committed in the long run this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amaguchi-san. That's, I mean, it's a fascinating, understanding how the ways in which our respective countries are supporting companies as they look to invest in critical sectors will be fundamental and also really, really important for us all to follow and compare. So thank you for that. And this is a bit of a perfect segue into Martine's question, which is, you've been monitoring, developments in Argentina's mining sector for years, but with a recent focus on lithium and on natural resource-based capacity building, all themes we've addressed to some degree so far on the panel. And so how do you see the lithium mining industry in particular in Latin America? I mean, Argentina specifically, but some other countries too, if possible, developing over the next few years, and how and will US and Japanese companies really fit prominently in this equation?
Thank you, Margaret. Well, Latin America is far from being a homogeneous region. So it's a patchwork of different policy strategies, normative frameworks, and technical challenges when it comes to the lithium industry. So I think that in the context of low lithium prices, Argentina and Chile are in a better position to expand the business volume and offer partnerships opportunities. There are many factors that explain this. One is that brine-based projects have lower OPEX. So in the context of low prices, this is more cost-effective, more convenient for projects. Then there are experienced lithium producers which are expanding their operations. So there are many brownfield investment projects which have lower risks. And in Argentina, there are many greenfield projects as well. And this is partly the result of a very, let's say, market-friendly, open normative framework. Chile now has launched its national lithium strategy, trying to expand its lithium frontier beyond the Atacama Sulfate, which has been traditionally the the place where operations developed over the years. So I would say that for these reasons, these countries are those with more opportunities in the region. On the other hand, we have other countries that opted for more nationalist approaches. Well, notably, Bolivia created a state-owned company many years ago and tried to develop a lithium operations controlled by this company, but they faced significant challenges, technical, political, management challenges. So far, they haven't been able to produce lithium at an industrial scale, and they changed their strategy a few years ago, trying to attract foreign investment to develop direct lithium extraction techniques. Mexico nationalized its mining operation, lithium mining, a few years ago. And Brazil is a kind of intermediate case because from a very low level, it grew significantly, has grown significantly over the last few years. It's trying to liberalize its normative framework to attract investment. So we'll see. So how do the US and Japan fit in this landscape? The first thing is that I say Argentina and Chile because are the countries who produce lithium at large scale are very important for Japan and the US. These countries explain between 80 and 95% of the imports of lithium carbonate in the US and Japan. So are very important partners. If we analyze the control of manufacturing operations in Argentinian region, the situation presents, let me put it in this way, significant challenges for the US and Japan. First, I mean, there is a US company in Chile, Albemarle. There is a US-controlled company in Argentina, Arcadian Lithium, which recently merged with Allkem, an Australian company. But today, we read in the news that it was acquired by Rio Tinto, which is an Anglo-Australian company. Japan has, well, a Japanese subsidiary of Toyota has a small stake in this project with Arcadium. So the thing is that the ability of US and Japanese firms to control lithium operations, lithium production in South America is quite limited. And if you see which are the companies investing in lithium, future lithium operations, the US and Japan are not there. So mostly, obviously, Chinese companies, Australian, Canadian, South Korea. So I think this is a very significant limitation for Japan and the US. They are playing the cards in different regions. The US is trying to develop its domestic industry. Japan Japanese company invested in operations or in projects in Canada, for example. A small stake, I think, also in Brazil. But the problem or the risk, say, in this case is that we don't know how prices will evolve. So we don't know if these projects will be economically feasible. Now, in the case of the US, they are highly subsidized. So they're going to develop the project, but the operations, I don't know. They are trying to secure supply of lithium through this critical mineral agreements, which I think are weaker instruments because, well, in the end, you do not control. I mean, it's a very indirect way to secure the supply of lithium and critical materials in general. So, well, I think these are very briefly the challenges that two countries face in this region? Thank you.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, watching things develop in real time in the lithium sectors is really quite an exercise, and you recognize some very clear trends right away. Thank you so much, Martine. And then finally, Kyla, thank you for your patience. But I would love to hear from you on. You do a lot of work on global trade, right? On wide-ranging other issues, of course, too. But it'd be really wonderful to hear your thoughts on the global trade landscape at present and its implications for U.S. and Japanese engagement in these and other emerging sectors in Latin America. Obviously, trade trends can be promoting of more in the way of engagement. Growing isolationism, of course, can be a huge impediment. So where do things stand? And I mean, how do you see the trade landscape shaping up and affecting prospects for collaboration?
Thank you so much, Margaret, for the invitation to speak today, for the question. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with all of you. So thank you so much. At the outset, I just want to note that my organization, the Congressional Research Service, works solely for the US Congress, and we don't take positions on any legislation or policy options or administration actions. So just wanted to put that out there. So about the political climate, trade policy direction agenda, there is a lot of unknown things related to that. And we will just have to see what the climate will look like following the elections just coming up in a few weeks. But that said, there are some trends I think that we will see continue perhaps in the realm of the US trade policy space. So first, US reliance on and competition with China, concerns about supply chain resiliency in general, concerns about economic security. I think these may continue to be an area of concern, an area of consensus among US policymakers that will continue to define and drive the US approach and focus when it comes to trade policy. And second, the US approach to trade policy. In recent years, we've seen US administrations generally shift towards targeted executive-led trade initiatives. And this has shaped US engagement with partners throughout the world in the Western Hemisphere, but also Japan, which does not have a comprehensive free trade agreement or FTA with the United States. So in 2023, the US and Japan concluded the US-Japan Critical Minerals Agreement. The Critical Minerals Agreement was just mentioned. So discussions about critical minerals agreements in general, just to give some context, grew out of trading partners' concerns related to the tax credit for new electric vehicles, or EVs, that was included in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So for example, there are rules in this tax credit requiring an increasing percentage of critical minerals in an EV battery to be sourced from the US or from US FTA partners. So following the conclusion of this US-Japan Critical Minerals Agreement, the Biden administration designated Japan as an FTA partner for the purposes of this EV tax credit. And Japan is the only country so far that has a critical minerals agreement with the United States, and it's the only non-comprehensive FTA partner that can participate in this critical minerals requirement. So negotiations are ongoing for critical minerals agreements with the EU and the UK, and there are debates in the US about expanding similar critical minerals agreements to other countries like Brazil or Argentina, which do not have FTAs with the US. So the US does have 11 comprehensive FTAs in Latin America, and it is also leading the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity Initiative with Western Hemisphere countries, which includes discussions about supply chain resiliency and integration. And we've already talked a lot about, I think, nearshoring and friendshoring of supply chains in sectors like critical minerals and energy and clean energy transition issues. So the EV tax credit requirements, the US-Japan Critical Minerals Agreement, this all fits into that discussion. I would also just note one other initiative, the US-led Mineral Security Partnership, which Japan is also a member of this partnership, and it's aimed at encouraging public and private sector collaboration on critical minerals investments in various regions of the world, including in the Western Hemisphere. And I think we've touched on some of those investments today. So this just brings me to the role of Congress in all this. So I mentioned earlier that trade policy has generally shifted towards executive-led targeted initiatives. And with past FTAs, comprehensive FTAs, Congress has generally provided the negotiating objectives and implemented FTAs through legislation. since so far this has not been the case with initiatives like critical minerals agreements. So as you can imagine, many members of Congress have publicly expressed their dissatisfaction with their level of involvement, their level of input in these trade initiatives in recent years. And I think this debate over trade policy, the roles of Congress and the White House in this discussion is a key consideration when thinking about the future of US trade policy, particularly the durability and consistency of US trade initiatives. So some members have expressed interest publicly, through legislation, through public statements. They've expressed their interest in developing stronger trade and economic ties with partners in the Indo-Pacific like Japan, as well as partners throughout the Western Hemisphere. But they've also expressed concerns about investments from China in third countries throughout the world, particularly in key sectors like critical minerals, EV batteries, et cetera, some of the areas we've been talking about today. So Congress will have an oversight role in a trade event that was mentioned earlier, the joint review of the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the joint review scheduled for 2026. So USMCA is set to expire in 2036 unless the three countries agree to renew the agreement. And the first opportunity for them to do so is through this scheduled 2026 review. And this joint review is an unprecedented provision for a US FTA. So I'll be watching to see how the three countries approach this review and any key outcomes of the review. So for example, the US approach to questions about PRC involvement in North American supply chains and PRC investments in North America. Right? So these could be a signal regarding how the US may approach other partners, for example, Japan and partners in the Western Hemisphere. So in closing, there are some potential headwinds, but also incentives and opportunities for US-Japan collaboration and collaboration with Western Hemisphere partners in the economic space, as well as other like-minded partners throughout the world to tackle shared global challenges, particularly in the critical sectors we've been discussing today. These require large amounts of capital, long production lead times. So I'll just leave you with a couple of questions that I'll be thinking about in the years to come. To what extent will collaborative trade initiatives and supply chain initiatives be successful in developing the supply chains in critical sectors while upholding shared values and supporting industry competitiveness? And will there be additional constraints on friendshoring and nearshoring initiatives due to political or economic and national security concerns? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyla. That was terrific, and I think we'll all be joining you in very closely monitoring the USMCA review in just a very short period of time coming up very soon. Thank you. I want to turn to Q&A. We have a remarkable audience, a lot of expertise in this room, and I know they'll have plenty of questions for you. But I don't want to relinquish control of the microphone without first asking just a little bit about political developments and their implications in Japan, and of course here in the US as well. And I mean, Mr. Hamaguchi, maybe I could ask you this question. We've seen a new prime minister now, assume leadership in Japan, Prime Minister Ishiba. How do you envision Japan's new leadership shaping the country's global engagement? Latin America, as we mentioned earlier, has grown in priority over time, over the past decade, essentially. We've seen a wide range of new policy initiatives, which tackle a even wider range of topics and areas of interest. Will this continue, do you think, under new leadership, including following the general elections? And then, how will the U.S.-Japan partnership also fare?
Okay. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's new cabinet started on October 1st. It is still too early to envision any changes in Japanese global engagement. In my impression, Mr. Ishiba did not deliver any meaningful message about his agenda for clean energy and critical mineral supply chains. So I think whether or not the new administration will be in a position to make any substantial proposal depends on the outcome of the House of Representatives election on October 27th. However, overall, it is unlikely that Japanese international policy will change substantially. And we expect that the recent approach to Latin America, emphasizing diversification of risks in economic security, should continue under the new leadership. Given the new Prime Minister's self-recognition as a security expert, there could be more kind of a nuanced caution toward China's presence in Latin America. In Japan's strategy for Latin America, public-private partnership around the de-risking critical minerals supply chains and lowering renewable energy costs have come to the central stage, and they are expected to develop further. The private sector also shows a very high expectation for starting negotiations of the economic partnership agreement with Mercosur. That's what I'm looking forward.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Jane, could I turn to you? I'm curious what you think about, obviously it's impossible for us to make predictions about the outcome of the US election, I think any of us at this point, but what do you see as the possibilities for continued, strong US Japan partnership, depending upon the outcomes in November?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for a really interesting question, very timely question. So as far as the bilateral US-Japan energy cooperation goes, many of the items are both have sort of climate mitigation benefits, but also energy security benefits. So, including nuclear, but also some of the non-fossil fuel-based collaboration, such as, carbon capture and sequestration. Those I think will remain durable. But when it comes to things, much more, in the bucket of climate, including some of the emissions monitoring, I think, it might be, it will likely be of a less, lower priority if there's a second Trump administration. But again, even within some of these energy technologies, things like energy storage, it has a lot of there, shall I say, sort of dual benefit, there are a lot of national security related needs for these technologies. So again, I think in the context of resilience, bilateral cooperation will remain. Where I'm much more worried about is what happens with more of a multilateral or third party, third country related cooperation. Things like, Kyla just mentioned, mineral security partnership, that's been, quite an active portfolio out of the State Department since 2022. Both, MSP, and that's for the critical minerals, very multilateral, ground scale, but then also the partnership for global infrastructure investment. Those two, I do wonder to what extent a Trump administration remain committed. I think I'm not as optimistic. But then also there's some of the regional or smaller ones like APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, that has Chile, Peru, and Mexico from Latin American world, and it also has the US and Japan as partners. Some of these, also, more of a regional stuff, it will remain. I don't think it will disappear because it's been going on for quite a while, since before I was at the Department of Energy. But I think the focus and then amount of commitment may change. And that's, I guess, where, I think providing alternative or diversifying the global supply chains, but then also making the global energy sector much more competitive requires, the continued engagement by the US and Japan. And I'm sort of hoping that that's, if there's a lot less investment or resource or human resource as a sort of investment into the multilateral from the US, from Washington, come, January 2025, I hope that's where Tokyo can sort of, complement and then try to sort of, address the potential gap. And if I may just quickly take 15 seconds to clarify, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't implying that the US and Japan, were engaged in energy resource colonialism in my earlier statement. I was simply saying that there's a history when it comes to energy resource engagement between, I guess, the OECD economies and non-OECD. There's been a lot of concerns around that. So again, I think that's where, this could be a really good example if, the US and Japan can get this right. But again, I wasn't saying that that's what, Washington and Tokyo have been, engaged.
Yes, and certainly there are a lot of discussions here about precisely about how to avoid, right, that sort of approach. So terrific. Thank you. That's very helpful. Oliver, could I ask you, I mean, again, taking advantage of you being here on the stage, what is the thinking right now in Brazil specifically, but if you could talk about Latin America broadly, about the prospects for enhanced or any U.S. Latin America engagement under, a Harris presidency or a Trump presidency, including in these areas that we're talking about, but just broadly would be of interest. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a new trend, which was not there in the past decades, is that Brazil, but also Argentina and several other countries in the region have fully embraced US domestic ideological polarization, which means that I can tell by the way somebody in Brazil thinks about the US electoral scenario, where they stand. So let's say the conservative center-right Brazilian political candidates have largely embraced Trump. The alignment on the left is somewhat less explicit because of long-standing concerns about US foreign policy more general on the left in Latin America, but it's basically a mirror reflection of what we have here in the US. And that, of course, complicates the strategic thinking about what these governments mean for Latin America. If I'm so into Trumpism or anti-Trumpism, that's my major way of actually interpreting the situation. So I think that's somewhat concerning because that leads towards two types of scenarios. One is that we have an ideological alignment, as we've had between Trump and Bolsonaro, but sometimes then we have a disalignment, and that actually sort of produces the risk of volatility in the bilateral relationship, which actually ideally shouldn't be the case, of course. The second thing is there's a long-standing strategic thinking in Brazil, and Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was president in the late 1990s, in early 2000s, he explicitly said, it's good that we fly below the US radar because all type of US attention tends to be the wrong type of attention, right? And it was nicely reflected in this Blinken piece in Foreign Affairs, which is 5,000 words long, and he doesn't mention Latin America, basically. I mean, he doesn't mention Mexico at all, which I thought was quite interesting. Now, Trump does talk a lot about Latin America on the campaign trail. So how do Latin Americans think about the two? My sense is that even though Trump projects himself as an isolationist, perhaps more so on the global scale, he's very much in favor of the Monroe Doctrine. He explicitly has embraced that when he was first president. Numerous of his officials have made that clear. There's a really remarkable statement by Trump in the memoir of John Bolton about Venezuela, how Trump sort of questions the strategic sovereign autonomy of Venezuela in the context of the 2019 crisis. So there's some concern that Trump would put a lot of pressure on Latin American countries, in particular when it comes to moving away from China, especially in the realm of technology. That may then also have an impact on the whole discussion we're having here on the energy transition, because it's so intimately tied to China as well. There's expectations that Harris would also do that, but in a sort of more subtle and elegant way. And I think the takeaway from Trump's first term vis-a-vis Latin America was that most initiatives to kind of maximum pressure these countries into aligning with the US have actually backfired, and they have led Latin American countries to circle the wagons and have people like Bolsonaro and the Brazilian generals to reluctantly side with Maduro and say, we can't really support even the rhetoric that may suggest US intervention in Venezuela. So I think that that those are some concerns, but I think there is in general a perception also that this illusion, which still dominates in Latin America, that despite the new Cold War between China and the United States, we can still just be non-aligned or multi-aligned and be friends with everyone. That at some point will be coming to an end, and that will require very difficult choices. Trump has said things like countries that participate in initiatives to circumvent the dollar will suffer 100% tariffs. That may include Brazil, which is part of BRICS, and there's a lot of initiatives there to circumvent the dollar. So these kinds of discussions, I think, we're not having. And we're still kind of in this, as I said, in this illusion that we can somehow just continue as we did in the 2000s and 2010s, where being friends with everyone came at largely no cost.
Absolutely fascinating. Much to watch in the next few months for sure. So thank you. I want to turn back to the sustainability issue in a moment, but before doing that, allow me to open to our audience for any questions or yes, please. And I think don't have a mic runner in here, so I'm going to play Oprah and come over to us.
Thank you so much. Alex Sanchez, an analyst here in DC. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but in this discussion about Japan, Latin America, Caribbean relations, the Caribbean has not been mentioned. All the examples that you talked about are from the mainland, from the Spanish-speaking or Portuguese-speaking countries. Where does Latin America, where does Caribbean fit in Japan's energy strategy and Japan's foreign policy? And I think this question is even more relevant because this year, 2024, is supposed to be the year of the Japan CARICOM Friendship Year, I think how it has been called. So, and I know the some Caribbean countries like Jamaica, Guyana have bauxite, they have copper, the Caribbeans also engaged in an energy transition program. So can you talk more about the Japan-Caribbean relations, particularly regarding energy and the sort? Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Any other questions that I could take while down here? Okay. I don't know. Oh, one over here. Terrific. Thank you. Two at once and then address those.
Good morning. Marta Gutierrez from Terrano Advisors, consultancy firm here in Washington for energy and critical minerals. I would like to understand if there is, the prioritization among the private and public institutions in Japan of the sector in which they would like to be involved, particularly in the 3 stages of the mining cycle or the development of resources. Like it would be a prioritization of upstream in the lithium or copper or in other critical minerals in the region, or it will be more on the midstream, downstream segment of the particular activity. Thank you. Because in all the countries involved could be a potential for both. Thank you so much.
Mr. O'Hara, if you have any thoughts on JICA's engagement in the Caribbean in response to the Caribbean question, and then anyone interested in, there's a lot of mining expertise on this panel. So.
Thank you very much for your questions. You asked me, especially energy sector in Caribbean region. Actually, at this moment, we don't have much cooperation program in the Caribbean region in this energy sector. But I think one of the important solution is energy savings. Japanese companies, relevant institutions have a very high level technical level and energy savings. So, we like to formulate in this theme, and we already started not only for Caribbean region but for LAC region entirely, providing technical cooperation and technical training program in Japan to introduce energy savings, energy efficiency in the LAC regions. So And the point we are now trying to expand our cooperation especially in Caribbean region.
Anyone interested in responding on mining? This question of types of mining investment, correct? Yes, please.
Currently, the investment strategy and interest toward Latin America with Japanese company, also public sector and the private sector are highly concentrated in the upstream sector, which is just mining and raw materials. Which is quite make a quite contrast to the Chinese investment in my impression. And I think China has a clear strategy from the upstream to the bottom. I mean, from the lithium production towards the electric vehicle production in Latin America. So I think in Japanese government and both government and private sector don't have such a coordinated strategy. Because Japanese engagement is basically depend on the private initiatives, and the government doesn't have such a role to coordinate everything. So at this moment, we still don't see any such coordinated involvement of the entire sector from the upstream to the downstream. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, another question over here. No more Oprah. Can't compete.
Hi, James Bosworth. There's a huge Japanese auto industry in Mexico. And one of the big debates right now is this question on whether BYD is going to enter Mexico. BYD is obviously expanding its electric car fleet rather rapidly, which is going to be a big use of lithium. I'm wondering how you view the threat of BYD and electric vehicles going into places like Mexico and Brazil, how that's going to impact Japanese auto manufacturers, and whether there's a role to play across this entire sector from critical mineral mining through the refinement of batteries and into the auto sector in Latin America, and whether you need to get that whole supply chain into Latin America if you're going to compete with the Chinese auto manufacturers as they enter the region.
Thank you. Any others? Another question up here?
Hi, I'm Gerardo Penchina, non-resident fellow from the University of Guyana. More than anything, the mineral supply chain needed in Japan, is it more directed towards electricity or towards like military equipment? Like, are we looking more towards like lithium, copper, cobalt, or are we going more like nobium, gallium, arsenide? How is that different? And how does that shape the strategy, thinking of like the mineral security partnership and the engagement that Japan has with the region? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take those two. Yes, please.
I think the question about BYD is very interesting because in a way, the strategy of BYD aligns with the expectations, the aspirations mentioned by Oliver about industrializing and developing a value chain in the region that industrializes our natural resources. I think that is the only way in which we can, in the case of lithium and other critical minerals, add value locally or regionally to our resources, is to create an electric vehicle market, because it is not that countries produce lithium batteries because they like it. I mean, the idea is they want to supply their EV industry to be competitive. So the only way we can develop a battery value chain is to have a regional vehicle market. And I think Chinese companies are in a better position than other companies because there is still a very significant, especially for our countries in Latin America, price gap between internal combustion and electric vehicles. And Chinese vehicles tend to be lower priced vehicles. So I think they are in a much better position, and it's a significant challenge for Western and Japanese companies, which have adopted in the region very conservative strategies. I mean, Brazil is the largest vehicle producer. Argentina is it's a moderate but still respectable producer of vehicles, and companies, they are not thinking of an energy transition. Actually, as you know, we have this very large shale gas, Vaca Muerta, in Argentina. And a few years ago, I remember that the Association of Vehicle Manufacturers said, okay, we can be a global hub for gas vehicles in the world. So I think that Chinese companies have already made that transition. So I don't know if incumbent players will be able to respond to the new situation at global level in terms of development of EV market.
If I may add just a few words, it's a really interesting question. Thank you. And I do agree with Marta. I think the Chinese model, and also China has these much more sort of middle to downstream segments of the EV battery manufacturing that really, is well aligned with a lot of the countries' aspirations, whether in Latin America or Southeast Asia. We're starting to see that. And quite frankly, the US and Japan are a bit behind China. Also, when it comes to, I think, Japan, the domestic market for EV has been really slow to materialize, and in the US as well. But generally, I mean, compared to the US, EU, or China, even if you have the technology, the market size is rather constrained, given, the land mass. But the Biden administration introduced this 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs several months ago, and it'd be interesting to see how that may affect the trade patterns, if you will, because Mexico being part of the U.S., Canada, the trilateral free trade agreement. Technically, if you do, I guess, if you're Chinese EV manufacturer, if you manufacture them, then you might be able to take advantage of the lot lower tariff rates. I think that's something that the USTR is closely looking at. The story may be somewhat similar in EU as well, although that EU tariff is not yet finalized. But I think some of the Chinese EV manufacturers are looking at markets like Turkey to see if they could, manufacture them and then try to access the EU market, sort of a fly under the radar. But I think ultimately, the U.S. consumers are not prohibited from buying these, the cheap or I guess low, smaller price tag EVs from China. Obviously, the tariff makes it very, very difficult. So I think there's also, the bit of a, I think the race is on, if you will, for some of the, U.S. and Japanese companies to be able to come up with a product line that may appeal to some of the, households with the smaller, budgets, perhaps, because, I think it might be just a matter of time that some of these, Chinese, more cost competitive EVs will start, reaching. Obviously, there's the Polestar. That's the, that's already selling some, but I guess that's still a bit limited. But it may. I wouldn't say it's definitely a matter of time, but I think it's much more likely that it's just a matter of time than otherwise.
Yes, Kyla. I was going to make you add.
Just a couple of comments to add on to what Jane said about the discussions under USMCA. So the BYD investments, I think, are explorations at this stage. It'll be interesting to see, if that moves forward, how there might be reactions in the US, particularly given that the joint review is happening in 2026 and how that might replicate what implications that might have for those discussions. I mentioned the concerns about PRC investments in third countries. I think that was part of it. Regarding the trade under USMCA, I think part of the concerns are about whether BYD could take advantage of duty-free trade instead of those 100% tariffs from China. Manufacturing in Mexico being treated as a Mexican good and being able to take advantage of the agreement, they would have to meet very strict rules of origin. And I think that could be very difficult, especially in the initial stages. But would they be paying the 2.5% most favored nation tariff, right? That is faced by all goods that don't meet the rules of origin in FTA agreements or from countries that are not FTA partners. I think that is another area of discussion. Some people in the policy community have suggested that the 2.5% tariff in the US is too low and have suggested raising that. And that would have implications for everyone, right? Because that's an MFN tariff that is faced by all countries. So just wanted to flag those two things, as well as, sorry, one more thing on the White House executive order on connected cars. So that could have also implications. That is something that I believe the proposed rulemaking came out maybe a few weeks ago. So seeing how that evolves and what implications that might have for any vehicles involving Chinese software, for example, that might be a blanket ban on those. So just adding that.
I mean, the BYD question is a fascinating one, especially in the Mexican context, because it depends on whether we believe that interest in that investment is exclusively focused on accessing the US market or whether it's focused on accessing also the Mexican market and other adjacent markets, right? And so it could be a little bit of both. It could be a little bit of both on different timelines, right? And so I think it'll be really interesting to see, just as you said, Kyla, and also Jana, how, what progress we see, if at all, toward the development. Much of what we're seeing are announcements, right, of investments in Mexico, but at the same time, a lot of actual concrete investment, but especially from low-end suppliers. We're tracking this carefully right now here at the dialogue, and they would feed easily into the BYD supply chain, to the extent that they have certain materials that are not able to be exported through USMCA. So it's an interesting development, and one I think that we're all very closely watching. Anyone want to respond to the question about types of rare earths or critical minerals that are being pursued at this juncture? So we can come back to that if you'd like. We have two questions from online. One from Viviana Benitez. What would be Japan's projections in its investments to Paraguay? So, where might Japan focus on in terms of Paraguayan markets, sectors looking ahead? I don't know if Hamaguchi-san, you have any thoughts on that, or?
The question is not only energy sector, but Paraguay as a whole.
Paraguay directly, yeah. Engagement with Paraguay specifically.
Well, we have a long history, experience in Paraguay in different sector. Well, originally we made a big investment in agricultural sector, but now changing the sectors, the priority sectors in project collaboration in Paraguay. As I mentioned earlier, the energy sector is very important for the country, and the development of space. We also working with Paraguayan spatial organizations, collaboration with Japanese universities. So now we are diversifying our cooperation in Paraguay, well and also as we consider their importance of their position in Latin America, their center of Latin America, and keeping very good, how to say, situation or condition or political condition very stable. So we'd like to, well, very small countries, but the relationship with Paraguay is very important for Japan, and especially a Japanese descendant is the working in there. So with keeping maintaining the relationship with Paraguayan government, we'd like to continue a little bit changing our cooperation to science, technologies, and energy sector. We'd like to continue that direction. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. And the next question, and perhaps this is a question for Martine, but then also for our Japanese colleagues. How is Japan looking at the RIGI initiative in Argentina, and just broadly speaking within the context of the Lithium Triangle? RIGI, is that Resource Governance Initiative? Does anyone, what?
Okay, okay, there is a new, okay.
I should have said it in
Thank you.
Spanish, thank you.
There is a new investment regime.
Large investments, got it.
Argentina already had an investment regime for mining investment, so a mining investment regime that offered tax benefits for mining companies. But this year, the government passed a law approving a more general investment regime, which is more generous for companies in the mining industry and other strategic industries defined by the government. My impression is that there are other macroeconomic restrictions that are limiting investment at the moment that this investment regime will not solve. And in particular, I refer to the capital controls. At the moment, investors, well, they're capital controls. So if they have controls of the earnings and exports. So I think until the government is able to lift capital controls, the new investment regime will not generate huge flows of investments beyond those investments that had already been decided under the current conditions. So of course, in the mining industry, there are many opportunities and many projects that are already developing that will continue, but decisions, I think, new decisions, investment decisions will be made after this controls are lifted. I don't know, it's my view.
Terrific. Any other questions from the audience or online? I just have one last question, and perhaps I should direct this toward Mr. Obaya and Mr. Ohara. But you know, we've touched on the sustainability issue. Obviously, you know, we're working toward a green transition, toward you know, energy transition, but there are implications associated with a lot of the investments that support these industries. And so, in thinking about this, you know, how can the U.S. and Japan potentially work together, or at least in a coordinated fashion, to ensure you know, the sustainable development of both the renewable energy sector, right, and also new lithium and other mining projects beyond, obviously, investments in these areas, right, and ones that are held to high standards. But are there other things that can be done? There has been some mention of a few possible areas of collaboration, coordination, but do you have any thoughts on maybe some real areas for group continued work jointly?
Well, thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think I have 2 points. The first, networking, especially public relevant organization, networking of their networking. Well, it is important develop support capacity development of public institutions in Latin America. They already have a high level of expertise. So, well, Japan works bilaterally with the certain countries, but we can utilize existing relevant institutions. And also, well, Japan and United States tend to work parallel style, but we can work together, stretch more, how to say, more closely collaborating with, and also including institutions in Latin America. We can work together in this, not only in this energy sector, but as a whole. We can work much more closer with, not only between Japan and the US, but with participation of relevant institutions in Latin America. Well, the other point is also, as I already mentioned, but funding mechanism to promote public-private partnership. Well, for example, in Chile, also is already have such a mechanism to promote hydrogen, green hydrogen. Chilean government has already made agreement, a loan agreement with World Bank and IDB. Well, Japanese government, Japanese private sector already has a connection to promote green hydrogen in Chile, but we also started to communicate with Chilean government. So, as a public sector, we also start to how we can collaborate to the hydrogen project in Chile. But in this case, also with Japanese organization, U.S. Financial organization and institution can work together with as a team to promote different type of renewable energy and energy transition.
Thank you so much. Martin, any final thoughts?
Thank you. Very briefly. Concerns about sustainability have been there for a few decades already. But in the case of the lithium, it's very interesting because as there are more projects developing the concern, I mean, there's too much pressure on territories. So people say, well, what will happen with biodiversity, water resources, how local communities will benefit from projects. Over the last few years, there's a novelty, I think, which is that players from critical mineral demanding countries are starting to trying to regulate the situation. So it's the demand side which put new norms and put pressure on suppliers to be more sustainable. So we have the case of the European batteries regulation in Europe. And in what regards OEMs, for example, General Motors, Tesla, BMW, Volkswagen, they are demanding their lithium suppliers to adopt for example, the IRMA standard, which is a very stringent certification for sustainability. So the problem with that, I think I see, I mean, on the one hand, this raises the bar, sustainability bar, we are in a better position than before. On the other hand, I think there is a risk of kind of privatization of sustainability compliance, because we rely on these private standards, and which are stringent but leave many holes, and are too based on corporations, on the behavior of corporations. And sustainability is a public good. So it's, in the end, ultimately is responsibility of governments. So I think a field of cooperation is how to strengthen governance, sustainability governance in resource-rich countries. Local governments do not have the capabilities to control and monitor operations, especially in the case of lithium, which is a totally different kind of mining. It's difficult to control what happens in these salt lakes. I mean, it's a complicated thing. There's too much research to do on the hydrological dynamic of these brines and how the biodiversity is affected. So we have to explore new production mechanism. We have used this evaporatic production process for decades, and now there are many firms exploring these direct lithium extraction methods. There's too much work to do about that. Even within evaporatic methods, I think that can be improved. So I think that it's a broad field to explore cooperation between the three regions.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. This is the conclusion of the panel portion of the session. We have some closing remarks by Ambassador Yamada, who is the Managing Director of the Japan Association of Latin America and the Caribbean. Before we go to those remarks, though, please join me in thanking this fantastic panel for their really remarkable contributions. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make a very short remarks. First of all, on behalf of the JALAC, Japan Association of the Latin America and the Caribbean, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to panelists, all those who participated in this seminar, its sponsors, and those who prepared its organization, especially Ms. Margaret Myers. In Japan, the new cabinet of Prime Minister Ishiba was inaugurated this month, and the general election will be held at the end of the month. Meanwhile, in the United States, the presidential election is less than a month away. While the policies of the new administrations are attracting a lot of attention, I must confess that in Japan, there is not necessarily a lot of interest in relation with Latin American and Caribbean countries. Though today we had a very interesting discussion on ROAC, Japan, and US relationship. Japan, United States, and many other countries share fundamental values such as freedom and democracy. And we are very important partners who can work together to solve global challenges and build a free and prosperous international society. We believe that strengthening and deepening our relationship and cooperation will be of great benefit to our respective countries and to the international community as a whole. In order to strengthen cooperation, it is important that Japan and the United States better recognize the importance of Latin America and the Caribbean. The JALAC, Japan Association of Latin America and the Caribbean, is engaged in a variety of activities to increase interest in Latin America and Caribbean in Japan through cooperation among industry, government, and academia. We are currently preparing to issue policy recommendations soon to strengthen relations between Japan and black countries. And now in its 10th year, this seminar, organized by Inter-American Dialogue and JARAC, has played an important role in strengthening relations between that countries, Japan, and the United States. I hope that the ties and friendship created during the seminar among its participants will be further deepened and that mutual understanding and cooperation will be further enhanced. And I hope to be able to see you all again of this seminar next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Yamada, and please do join us for lunch. The catering is arriving right now, so grab some coffee and it'll be here in a minute. Okay.